There are probably 40-something apps on your phone right now. A streaming library with more titles than you could finish in a lifetime. A podcast about literally any subject you could name. And somehow, at some point today, you were still bored. So let's ask a question almost nobody bothers to ask. What did early humans do when they got bored? Not medieval peasants, not Romans, not Egyptians. Go further back than any of that. 100,000 years, 200,000 years. Before writing, before art, before music, before anything we'd recognize as a civilization existed. Just people, sitting somewhere with time on their hands and nothing obvious to fill it with. The answer reshapes how we think about creativity, religion, and the way your own brain works when you leave it alone. But there's a problem to settle first. Did boredom even exist back then? That's a real scientific debate, and for a long time the assumed answer was no. The picture most people carried around was of ancestors who were too busy staying alive to be bored. Every hour spent hunting, foraging, hauling wood, patching shelter, survival as a full-time job with no vacation days. That picture turned out to be badly wrong. In 1966, the anthropologist Marshall Solins published work that upended it. He'd drawn on years of study of the Kung San of the Kalahari, one of the last groups on Earth still living something close to the way humans lived for most of our history. Their working hours came out to somewhere around 15 to 20 a week. Not per day, per week. The rest of the time, they rested, they talked, they sat around, they did nothing in particular, at length, without apology. Salins called them the original affluent society, not because they owned much, but because they were rich in the thing modern people run out of first, time. Which means the question was never whether early humans got bored. The question is what they did about it. Start with the simplest answer. They played. That sounds trivial. It isn't. In 2010, the archaeologist Francesco D'Erico and his colleagues examined a collection of shells recovered from Blombos Cave in South Africa. The shells were about 75,000 years old. Each one had a hole drilled through it. Each was coated in red ochre. They weren't tools. They weren't weapons. They weren't food. They were beads. Someone sat down 75,000 years ago and made jewelry, an object with no function beyond looking like something. It stands among the oldest known art objects in the human record, and it exists because a person had hours to fill. Consider what making them actually involved. Drilling through shell using stone, with no metal, no drill bit, no leverage worth mentioning. That's not a 5-minute project. That's an afternoon, possibly several, of slow, repetitive work performed by someone with no lifetime of entertainment training their patience. And they did it anyway, because the alternative was looking at the wall. We tend to say necessity is the mother of invention. In this case, it wasn't necessity. It was having nothing else to do. The same pattern shows up when music enters the record. In 2008, researchers excavating a cave in southern Germany recovered a flute. It had been carved from the wing bone of a vulture, 5 finger holes, roughly 40,000 years old. Before farming, before permanent settlements, before any culture we'd label a civilization, somebody took a bird bone and figured out how to make it sing, not out of survival pressure. There is no scenario where a hungry person is saved by a flute. It happened because somebody had a free afternoon and a piece of bone that seemed interesting. The neuroscientist Daniel Levitin, who studies where music comes from, has argued that our musical capacity predates language, that we were wired for rhythm and melody before we could assemble complicated sentences. The logic is that rhythm is pattern recognition, and pattern recognition is one of the oldest survival tools we have. Music may simply be that machinery running with no threat to point it at. But the most consequential thing boredom produced wasn't art or music. It was imagination. Follow this for a second. You can't be bored without a sense of time. Boredom requires knowing that this stretch is dragging, that something else might be happening instead, that a future exists and could be more interesting than the present. That's not a small mental feat. Boredom is arguably the first evidence that a mind can picture things that aren't in front of it. Animals don't experience it the way we do. A dog waiting by the door isn't bored, it's waiting. There's no competing scenario running in its head, no sense of a better version of this moment being missed. Now put a person in a cave 100,000 years ago, staring into a fire with nothing demanding their attention. The mind drifts, and it starts producing questions. What if tomorrow's hunt goes badly? What made that sound outside? What's on the other side of that mountain? What happens to us when we die? Every question religion has ever tried to answer. Every question philosophy has circled for millennia. Every question science is still working on. All of it starts in the same place, a mind with spare capacity, wandering. Modern research supports the mechanism. In 2013, the psychologist Sandy Mann ran an experiment built around the dullest task she could design, copying numbers out of a phone book. Then she measured participants' creative performance immediately afterward. The bored group substantially outperformed the others. Boredom, it turns out, pressures the brain into producing its own stimulation, and a brain forced to entertain itself is a remarkable machine. There's one more thing bored humans did, and arguably it mattered more than all the rest. They talked. Not about hunting routes, not about food storage or logistics. They told each other stories about people. The anthropologist Robin Dunbar, the same researcher behind the finding that human social networks tend to max out around 150 people, spent years studying what humans discuss when nothing important is on the table. His conclusion, roughly 65% of human conversation is social gossip. Who did what? Who said what to whom? What happened to someone you both know? It reads like wasted breath. It wasn't. Dunbar's argument is that language didn't evolve primarily as a coordination tool. It evolved for bonding. Before language, primates maintained relationships through grooming, physical, direct, and painfully inefficient. Grooming is one-to-one. You can only maintain one friendship at a time, and the day only has so many hours. Language broke that ceiling. Suddenly you could bond with 3 people at once. 10. An entire group sitting around a fire. You could talk about someone who wasn't even present. You could build trust with people you'd never physically touched, which means human society may not have emerged because we needed to organize hunts. It may have emerged because we were sitting around with nothing to do and started talking about each other. Boredom produced gossip. Gossip produced community. So look at where this lands. 75,000 years ago, a bored person in a cave made a bead. 40,000 years ago, a bored person in a different cave made a flute. And somewhere across all those millennia, people around fires with empty evenings began asking questions nobody could answer about death, about the sky, about why anything is the way it is. Some of those questions turned into religion, some turned into science, some turned into art. And some of them turned into you, lying awake at 2 in the morning with your phone resting on your chest, thinking about nothing in particular. There's a modern counterpart to all this that gets discussed far less than it should. Psychology has a name for the state produced by eliminating idle time entirely: cognitive overload. When every gap gets filled, the brain never gets the conditions it needs to do its quiet work: processing, consolidating, connecting. The system responsible for that work is the default mode network, the circuitry that comes online when you're not focused on anything external. It's closely tied to creativity, self-reflection, and empathy. It activates in the gaps. And it only gets gaps if you leave some. We spent something like 300,000 years learning to fill silence with things that mattered. Then we built a device that fills it automatically, and we've barely stopped since. But the capacity didn't go anywhere. Every time you set the phone down and sit with nothing for a while, every time your attention drifts and you let it drift instead of reaching for a screen, you're doing exactly what that person in the cave was doing. The same process that produced the bead, the same process that produced the flute, the same process that looked up at the sky one night and started asking why. Boredom never held our ancestors back. It's a large part of what made them human. Given the chance, it'll do the same for you.